Hello and most welcome to 1792. This might be at B level since we are lacking batteries on the other end, the Kalelundon end. We see what happens. We continue today where we left off at page 487. That was episode 1790. Of Kripke on Wittgenstein on ruse. Last time we mentioned that the pictures that possessed, a bit exaggerated, that possessed Kripke was started from his own mind, his own misconception how language is working, and not language as such. And there is, of course, a huge difference in between the two. How language is actually working and the idea or the picture you have of the workings of language. This, I would say, is another way of looking at the private language argument. You are simply not even making sense to yourself, and neither, of course, to others. There is no better way to mention the picture than that, the misconception of a cut off innerness with no connections to anything whatsoever. That is at the very bottom of the picture. You become less and less understandable by others. You can also say, stop making sense. In the end, you will not make any sense whatsoever. So let me just repeat that very pertinent realization from Wittgenstein. The picture is ungrounded in language. It simply is not there. And we continue where we left off. The second paragraph on page 487. The earlier part of we can take the whole paragraph. The earlier part of the rule following considerations, philosophical investigations, paragraphs 185 to 202. Deals more directly with the substance of the demand. That is, with the search for that which unconditionally fixes the correct continuation according to a rule. The scenario of paragraph 185 immediately engenders the proposal in paragraph 186 that how the rule is meant is what does this. Wittgenstein then points out that if we are not to take for granted what we unofficially know, namely what follows from the rule, then no way of characterizing what is meant will settle what to call agreement of any continuation with it. Now, there are circumstances in which we do say that how we mean a rule determines what the continuation should be. But the plain sense in which we speak of such determination is the sense in which the explanations and examples we actually give are the best answers to the question of what in the same way consists in. It may be said the way the formula is meant determines which steps are to be taken. We say, for instance, to someone who uses a sign unknown to us, if by X exclamation 2 you mean X to the power of 2, then you will get this value for Y if you mean 2 times that one. Now ask yourself, how does one mean the one thing or the other? That will be how meaning it can determine the steps in advance. There's nothing mysterious here, for this is a notion of fixing the correct continuation that operates for us, given the background our language provides, our practices, and our understanding of each other. The demand, however, is for a fixing of the correct continuation that does not rely upon us or take for granted anything about us at all. What Wittgenstein principally wants to suggest is that we do not have any real conception of what this comes to. We have, as Wittgenstein is wont to say, no model of it. This, in part at least, is what is on Wittgenstein's mind in Philosophical Investigations, paragraph 201. This was our paradox. No course of action could be determined by a rule, because every course of action can be made out to accord with a rule. The answer was, if everything can be made out to accord with the rule, then it can also be made out to conflict with it. And so there would be neither accord nor conflict here. In believing that anything can be brought into agreement, in believing, for example, that there is something we could do that would make 1,000 and 1,004 in agreement with the rule add 2. The paradox monger has assumed some notion of accord with the rule, but has divested it of the ways we go about taking things to be in accord or not. That is why the answer to the paradox is that there is no sense of accord here at all. Interpretations of a rule make sense only given a conception of agreement with a rule. To take variant interpretation to pose a problem. about the functioning of rules is to ignore what goes into our having that conception. Namely, the background that our practices provide. Of course, far more can be got out of or read into this section of the investigations and its forerunner, paragraph 198. But it is clear that Wittgenstein is not proposing this paradox full voice. It arises only for those who accede to the terms of the demand for that in which following a rule really consists. On the approach to Wittgenstein's rule-following considerations, which I have sketched, the points they bring to bear are far less conclusive than Kripke claims. I think this is accurate to Wittgenstein's intentions. In particular, the private language argument is not given in paragraph 202 and does not fall directly out of the rule following considerations. That argument can be joined only by an examination of what is supposed to provide a notion of fixing correctness in its case. Such an examination, I take it, is the task of the 14 sections between Wittgenstein's proposal of the idea of a private language in paragraph 243 and the section containing the private language argument proper, paragraph 258. Similarly, the rule-following considerations are not meant to yield a conclusive refutation of one or another sophisticated philosophy of language. Rather, they operate by examining what frames the first steps of a search for an account of meaning. And they are effective only insofar as what Wittgenstein provides, starting in paragraph 185, is a convincing portrayal of how such a project comes to have a hold on us. A better understanding of Wittgenstein's position thus requires far more clarity than we currently have about the sources of the in-choate demands we put on the notion of meaning, and about the role such demands play in philosophical theorizing. And thereby we end the reading of Kripke on Wittgenstein on Rules by Warren D. Goldfarb. I have contacted Warren D. Goldfarb, still waiting for a response. I have some questions considering his texts. But what Wittgenstein / Goldfarb is pointing to here is, how can you express this? It's our want to have explicit rules, if you like, almost rules that you can put on paper or think in your head a priori, in advance. And that the concept of rule following is, so to speak, limited. What do I mean by limited? Well, in the case of Kripke, he says that communality in an action is, so to speak, the only thing that constitutes a rule. So although that Kripke cannot point to it clearly, he's still saying it's only this aspect. You see what I'm getting at? It's a bit forehand. You can hypothetically cut that out of the flesh of reality and only use that to understand what he calls sense or meaning. And thereby he is breaking the reality of language. He's becoming, and like his own language, an isolate, stranded on a deserted island with very little contact even to himself. If we go to page 487, there's a quote there, and God-giving we can continue. Second paragraph, 7 lines down, or 6. Wittgenstein then points out that if we are not take for granted what we unofficially know, namely what follows from the rule, then no way, and listen now, this is so important, no way of characterizing what is meant will settle what to call agreement of any continuation with it. That sort of sums it up. We are ignoring the totality of reality. We are ignoring quantum mechanics, the solutions or the results of quantum mechanics. And what are the solution or results of quantum mechanics? Well, we cannot stand outside of our own situation. We are always irrevocably involved in an unimaginably complex way, and no simplification nor agreement will settle that business. Since Kalle's batteries are diminishing, he's going to come in early on here. Kalle, please come in. We will make this a discussion.
201, paragraph 201. This was our paradox. No course of action could be determined by a rule, because every course of action can be made out to accord with the rule. This is actually what you have been saying since we met in 2018, and we should stamp this in gold. This is what Newtonian classical physics is about. They claim in classical physics, every course of action can be made out to accord with the rule, that is after the fact, after something has been done.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. I missed that. It's very good, Kalle.
So after let's say a tennis game, imagine Federer playing. After the fact, you can always calculate the action in classical physics. But as De Bono has been saying, that it's so easy always saying things a priori, that is after the fact. But the quantum physics is about before the fact.
Yes,
that is what Wittgenstein is emphasizing here. No course of action could be determined by a rule. This is very important. Here we have the difference between classical physics and quantum physics.
Yes.
Hallelujah. And Wittgenstein points this out.
It's unbelievable.
No course of action could be determined by a rule. This is quantum physics. And this is Wittgenstein.
Yeah.
And in the second phrase, we have Kripke and everybody else, classical physics. Every course of action can be made out to accord with the rule. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
It's very good. It's very good. Thank you very much. I think it's God played a rule here and let you preserve your battery, so you come in with this comment. Very good, Kalle.
Hallelujah to you, Hans, also insisting with this paper by Goldfarb.
And it's also great thanks to dear departed Edward de Bono, the Nestor, the master of creative thinking. And he said something to the extent that everything will be possible to be made logical afterwards. But you cannot use logic to come to that conclusion before. And therein lies the great divide between before and after. Very good.
Yes, everyone make this distinction, this chronological mistake. After the fact, it's always easy to go with a rule. And here we have to take the rule in two senses. That is, of course, the physical rule that you use to measure, but rule also in a metaphorical sense, like rules that laws that a command puts out but also rules or laws that you have in the universe. So this is very also important to point out. So rule is here in all senses possible.
And we human beings, or at least the classical physicists, they have constructed the classical laws afterwards, after the Big Bang, and then they made them eternal. And that is a thinking mistake that is very much paralleled by Lee Smolin, as I mentioned so many times, and Roberto Unger. And it's also in this very, very lovely quote, Philosophical Investigations 201. It's contained in this sentence. And I also like the ironical. The answer was, if everything can be made out to accord with the rule, then it can also be made out to conflict with it. You can do as you want, and there is no, it's the private language problem once more turning up there to some extent, I think.
No, it's a rule here, so let's say also a measuring device that Kripke wants to put on our brains. You can measure. So after the fact, it's easy to measure out. Let's say a great speech by Winston Churchill. After the fact, perhaps this is I don't know. I think the emotions, perhaps, if I listen to a great speech, probably you can measure them afterwards or during, I don't know, what do you say, Hans, you have studied?
Well, it's a tendency. It's so easy to point out for, as you mentioned, Winston Churchill, afterwards to tell what mistakes he made. He made I don't know if you're aware of that, but he made an enormous mistake as a minister.
In Turkey.
Yeah, in Turkey, you're aware, yeah.
But I was most thinking about speeches that he gave that your teacher 2 days ago proposed that you are actually able to measure the effects.
Yes. My teacher.
But these measurements are made after the speech or during the speech. How does it work really?
Well, the idea is to measure the effects in the brains, and that would be the response. And yes, that's another angle of the private language problem, definitely, that there should be a definite state of mind. And what that teacher did, and I hope he's not listening to this, was mixing, actually in a more complicated way, harder to understand, before and after. So you can compare it to Roger Penrose looking at the game and then afterwards saying, well, wasn't it that Roger Penrose decided to smash the ball in that certain instance, and did not Boris Becker for a second not respond properly, and that was his uncalled for response. Can you see, this is also the sort of applying rules, of course, in a more loose sense. And
so we could say that so Wittgenstein is agreeing with Penrose.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in my opinion, yeah, of course, in my opinion. And thinking, and this is complicated, this is more complicated than I want to make it right now, but thinking is, in the common sense, almost seen as a set of rules. So if I stretch my hand here for the cup, that was regulated, I look afterhand, by me thinking in a certain way, I want the cup or something like that. And then we get this problem that Paul Johnston pointed out, that we make thinking into an a posteriori act of words or images. And in a more complex way, that is also a confusion of before and after. I have another quote, if I may.
Yes, yes, please.
Wow, the batteries are really working well. Let's
It's
see.
blinking. My computer is blinking since 10-15 minutes. Okay,
Magic.
please tell me the quote.
As 487.
487 on this page. So is it this one?
Yeah, it's the quote. Yeah, quote from Wittgenstein then. And I will just briefly make an acronym or a summary of what he says before. It is about the continuation, more or less, of a long rule. And in that continuation, you cannot know how the rule will develop. And the actual quote, that will be how meaning it can determine the steps in advance. So there cannot be a sort of say pre-made rule that needs to be followed or can be expressed in some way. There can't be a sort of thinking that determines the actions. There can't be and can't even be imagery, I'd say. Me stretching for the cup, I will put in the camera here. As you see, me stretching for the cup cannot be a series of imagery that are following each other. A bit further, new image, new image. Neither can there be certain words. I want the cup. What will I do? I will reach for the cup, and so on. So you see here, believing that language is words, believing that the whole thinking process is a sort of rule following. So bear with me, it's a stretch, but it does apply to thinking as well. It is definitely in that region. And the idea, as we mentioned in this marvelous example by Roger Penrose, where he says that there are two games almost, the one happening, the before game, where the superposition in his language is constantly collapsing because of the different choices, not rule-governed choices, open choices by Roger Federer when he does his smashes in the ball, and Boris Becker is unaware. He doesn't have another thinking or another set of rules in the form of words. So before, after, it's a huge difference. It's an enormous difference. Later, I can communicate with you, the ones who are listening now. I can tell you, I wanted to stretch for the cup. Therefore, I first thought I'll raise my right hand and arm, and I will start to stretch in the direction of the cup, being to the left of me, and then I will reach down and I will fasten my grip around the cup, and there I have it. That's after the fact. And I am now doing something together with you and others, another type of language game than the thinking about reaching for the cup. You could say communicating something for a completely different purpose, having nothing to do with my original grip, or very little. I would say there is a family resemblance going on here, but they are different. We mentioned that before in connection with Paul Johnston. When I ask you for the time, we're participating in a communal thing. What time is it? I'm not interested in your inner clock or how you perceive time. In a way, it's absolutely obvious I'm looking for something else. There's a point, what Wittgenstein calls Witz. I want to get somewhere in time. There could be many examples. But do be careful. Do not confuse these examples given by Wittgenstein for ruse, as Kripke did. They are there to give you a sense, an almost poetic sense of there could be other possibilities. But the possibilities pointed out by Wittgenstein are not the only ones, or maybe not the ones. So that deceitful paragraph, meaning is use, oh my God, it really has put a lot of misunderstanding on the way. A lot of misunderstanding. And if it doesn't really sound like you're constructing a rule if you say meaning is use, but even if you cannot point it out, as it looked like I could with the rules for my thinking of reaching the cup, it is still a mistake. This is not how language is properly working. It's a further cite on page 487 to the very bottom here. It's still about the continuation of the number series. The demand, however, is for a fixing of the correct continuation that does not rely upon us or take for granted anything about us at all. What Wittgenstein principally wants to suggest is that we do not have any real conception of what this constitutes. Very important. We have no conception. We have, as Wittgenstein is wont to say, no model of it. And that model, as I said, can be the idea of inner speech, inner imagery, the rules governing the number series, the rules for the grammatical aspect of language, as in universal grammar. What is it instead? Well, go to page 488. To take variant interpretations to pose a problem about the functioning of rules is to ignore what goes into our having that conception, namely the background that our practices provide. And that's an enormous background. From that stem materiality, substance, essence, token, signified, representationalism, all is in this complexity. It will work until we a posteriori says it will be following some rules, or it did follow some rules. And the next step could be that we use the a posteriori, so to speak, already a priori. The exact same mistake that was made in the universe or by the cosmologists. First establishing a Big Bang, or saying that there is Big Bang. We don't know how it works. That is that grammatical function misused here, almost like a starting point. Is then used to construct, or from that get the classical laws. And then when you have them a posteriori, after the fact, after Big Bang, and the billions of years that happened since, we also create time and space here, as you might have noticed. We can use them to go into the future and says, these a posteriori laws will also be a priori to the future. And all of a sudden, everything's locked. See, determinism, or it's locked logically or thinking wisely, it's absolutely locked. This is the exact lockdown that is being the fly in the bottle. So what Wittgenstein does is to show the fly out of the bottle. He wants to show us how to get out of this terrible lockdown, this confusion that hinders us to understand ourselves, our surroundings, all our connections to everyone, to whatever it might be, papers, your daily doings, what you are active with, what is this, how does that work, and so on. Everything connected to reality will be in danger, in peril. It will not be working in the same smooth way anymore. You would lose that flexibility of thinking, of acting, being engaged in the world. active. There will always be a sort of friction. You will try to apply your rules in your head to the future, and disappointment to a certain degree will make you cling to it even more. Just like good old Kripke did, or does. A better understanding of Wittgenstein's position, thus, at the end of the article, thus requires far more clarity than we currently have about the sources of the in-choke demands we put on the notion of meaning, and about the role such demands play in philosophical theorizing. So meaning is use doesn't sound like much of a limitation, but it is a pretty aggressive marker in the end, and it limits everything already before it had any chance to say what it wanted to say. It doesn't give that openness, that leeway to decide for yourself. And I say thank you very much for participating. Thank you, Kalle Lundahl, although you went out a bit too early, but it was an extremely interesting quote you brought out there. Thank you very much for that. Have a very good morning, day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye for now.